sector that's devoted to Southeastern Europe. So I would say probably the biggest barrier has been the lack of ambition, or the people who didn't have, frankly speaking, enough vision to see that this indeed is a place not only where they can be successful in their home countries, but where they can easily export their expertise to surrounding countries. So I would simply say it may have taken a while, but ASECA would be a perfect example of, if you have the right entrepreneur who can see how easily the products and services he offers can be successfully sold in surrounding countries, and who also can see that by successfully acquiring companies with a similar mindset, as opposed to doing it from scratch, you can build basically overnight what is probably, I don't know, I'm going to guess it's maybe one of the 15 or 20 largest technology companies in Europe now.
Okay, thank you, Mihai. Can we get a bit more specific? What are the barriers? I did, by the way, I didn't say there are no success stories in the region, but there are not many. And I'm looking to find out what's the barrier. Is it lack of ambition?
Well, I think it also requires the entrepreneur to change, because when you create a startup, you have to be a very brave man or woman, and you need to take a lot of risk, because typically you have an idea and a very limited amount of money, and you have to be prepared to risk all that, plus the opportunity cost of not receiving a salary from an employer. As the company grows, then typically at a certain level, it then requires it requires more and more some professional management. It requires analysis. It requires analysis of competition. It requires testing some products. And very successful entrepreneurs have been able to take their company to the next level, because they transform themselves, and very often they teamed up with the right partners, whether they were venture capitalists, private equity people, or angel investors, or simply some other business partners. And I think this is maybe one of the barriers that we're facing in the region, and not only in the region.
Okay, thank you. Dan, what do you think?
I think that apart from these high-level motives, which are perfectly valid, I think there is also the more mundane issue of lack of trade relations, lack of transportation connections between countries. It's amazing still, and I think it's unheard of that we still have very limited flights between neighboring capitals. And I'm talking about Bucharest and Kiev. These are two largest markets, countries in the region, and there is still no direct connection between Bucharest and Kiev. You always have to fly through Austria, through Germany in order to get there. If you look at Bucharest and Sofia, we are 5 hours drive away. There is only one flight away, and most of the people I know are quite scared to take that flight. So there are also practical issues which entrepreneurs have to take into account and have to face when they think about expansion.
Infrastructure, interesting. John, can you think of barriers? Also, probably a sub-question, which is, of course, legal. I mean, if you take a look at expansion strategies of Central European startups, do you see anything in particular related to legal? Different jurisdictions, differences in
I don't think that the barriers are necessarily legal, particularly with the exception to the EU of most of the countries. I've not harkened back to some of the things that have been already said, and the deals that I've worked on, where there has been international expansion by the local company. Typically what I've found is they have, as Ed pointed to, a very international-minded, strong entrepreneur at the head of it. I mean, the one Romanian company, Sindan, They had a very successful international strategy. I think that was in part due to the entrepreneur that was the head of that company. I think there's a second factor, and Ioana mentioned it before. One of the things that really can help you do that is by bringing international directors to your board, whether it's private equity or not. And for example, we represented Adobe in the acquisition of Interact, and George Hager was on the other side. But the way that transaction transpired, I think, was in large measure because George Hager was on the board. I think it would have been a very different experience if he were not. And so, a couple of suggestions. One is, think about having international directors because they will make you think internationally and regionally.
Okay, thank you. Guys, both Weihai and Naveed saw a company which was rapidly growing from pretty much a startup phase, right? So you've seen the company expanding still. What are the barriers or what needs to be overcome in order to be successful?
If you're a startup, the obvious is cash. Okay, so how do you expand if you don't have the cash? The second thing is language. Language is an issue, translation, localization. What is your product? If it's a logistic, if it's electronics, if it's mobile, if it's internet's a little bit easier to do, apart from localization. Then I think that the key part is what is your strategy of expansion? Is it a partnership, or are you going to create a subsidiary? Because there are different pros and cons, and that's about lack of cash versus trust. And I think that's very key. And I think in the countries that we've been in, a lot of people probably have a fear to expand to other countries where they don't know or have a good or a trusted network, let's say, something like that.
Okay, thanks. Weihai?
Yeah, I agree with all of the above. We talked about infrastructure, distribution channels, partnerships. I guess there's a bit more of for a fairly early stage company, I think there's a bit more of a barrier. In my time at Shell, I wasn't in oil, but I was at a venture capital fund at Shell Internet Ventures. And one of the things we always looked at, for Shell, it was very clearly the same thing Greg Marsh said before. If it's not global, not interested for Shell, obviously. And the one thing that we always found is the understanding, and something that he was talking about, the understanding and the knowledge of the different nationalities and different regions involved. Shell being Shell, of course, they send a team of 15 people with a couple of McKinseys there to do research. But for us, in the Internet Venture Fund, we did understand finally that there needs to be that understanding of homework has to be done. And from a more basic point of view, all the things that have been mentioned before, generally if you see what help with distribution and partnership, do you understand the marketplace? Does your concept fit? And do you have an idea how to do it? I think that's the biggest beginning barrier.
Thank you, gentlemen. And we have actually just one entrepreneur in the panel, so obviously he now speaks for the entrepreneurs. But Betzer, you're the CEO of a company who's trying to expand internationally, more or less successfully, or in parts of the region successfully, in other parts less successfully. What are the barriers? What do you do to overcome those barriers?
Well, I very much think that most of the barriers have been already mentioned here. I think that the most important thing is that if you play a Central and Eastern European game, you have to understand that it's a very heterogeneous territory with so many small languages, with so many different nationalities. And ourselves, we very much take that as rather as an opportunity than as something that we shall cry about and be sorry. There's so many things that you don't really expect, and you simply meet on those markets. There are markets where the bosses of mobile carrier tell you, okay, we speak English, but our staff doesn't. So we